Hi there, welcome back to Head and Neck Spotters. Already in previous session we have learned about lot more, and in today's we will be continuing about part 2 Head and Neck Spotters. So let's begin. So structures we are going to cover in today's session are folds of dura mater, internal acoustic meatus, jugular foramen, parotid gland and its duct, submandibular salivary gland, muscles of mastication, contents of infratemporal fossa, and contents of orbit. So these are the topics which we would cover today. The first spotter in second session is spotter number 23 because in previous session we ended with the spotter number 22. So under 23 spotter we shall begin with the folds of dura mater. So here we can see a sickle-like fold which is called as falx cerebri. This sickle-like fold of dura mater is called falx cerebri, which is present in the median longitudinal fissure separating two cerebral hemispheres. So this falx cerebri, which is has got an anterior narrow attachment which attaches to the crista galli, which is a part of cribriform plate of ethmoid, and also it attaches to the frontal crust, which is present on the inner surface of the frontal bone. And posteriorly it is quite broad and it continues with the tentorium cerebelli, which is another fold of dura mater. So it continues with the tentorium cerebelli. Upper margins of the falx cerebri attaches to the superior sagittal sulcus. So sagittal sulcus where superior sagittal sinus is present. So it attaches to the lips of the sagittal sulcus superiorly, and inferiorly it is a free border. So these are about the attachments. Sinuses present within this falx cerebri are superior sagittal sinus, which is along the upper margin, and inferior sagittal sinus, which is along the lower free margin, and straight sinus, which is at the point of meeting between the tentorium cerebelli and falx cerebri. Same falx cerebri. So here is the same falx cerebri. You can see here the pinned structure is falx cerebri. Spotter number 24 is falx cerebelli. Here the pinned structure is falx cerebelli, which is a fold of dura mater separates two cerebellar hemispheres in the posterior cranial fossa. Superiorly, this falx cerebelli is continuous with the tentorium cerebelli. So above it attaches to the tentorium cerebelli and it is along the occipital crust, on the inner surface of the occipital crust, and attaches till the margins of foramen magnum. So this one is the foramen magnum which continues as the spinal canal here, and these are the vertebrae cervical vertebrae which you can appreciate. So this opening is the foramen magnum. So falx cerebelli attaches to the posterior margins of foramen magnum. And sinuses, it encloses occipital sinus. So that is the only sinus which is present within falx cerebelli. Okay, moving on to spotter number 25 is tentorium cerebelli, which is like a tent-like structure, separates the cerebellum from rest of the brain. So it forms the roof of the posterior cranial fossa. So you can see one side of tentorium cerebelli, and above you can see that it is continuous with the falx cerebri. Falx cerebri we just now discussed in previous slides. This is falx cerebri. Here is the anterior side and posterior broader end, which is continuous with the tentorium cerebelli. So tentorium cerebelli, anteriorly it presents a free margin. So this is the free margin, and edges of the free margin it attaches to the anterior clinoid process. So we can see here it attaches to the one side anterior. This is the other side anterior clinoid process. It attaches anteriorly, and rest of it is a free margin where the midbrain is lodged within the U-like margin. So the tips of the U attaches to the anterior clinoid process. On each side, anteriorly, anterolaterally on each side, it attaches to the upper border of the petrous part of temporal bone. So we can say superior border of petrous part of temporal bone. Posterolaterally on each side, posteriorly, it attaches to the transverse sulci. So it attaches to the transverse sulci, lips of the transverse sulci, enclosing the transverse sinus on each side, right and left side. And sinuses which are present in this fold of dura mater here, posteriorly transverse sinuses are there. At the junction of falx cerebri and tentorium cerebelli, we have got the straight sinus. And along the upper margins of petrous part of temporal bone, we have got superior petrosal sinus. So these are the dural venous sinuses which are present within the tentorium cerebelli. So here one more image showing tentorium cerebelli. We can see from above one half of the tentorium cerebelli, and this is the one half of the U-like thing, which is a free margin, anterior free margin. And here is the petrous part of temporal bone, upper border. So anterolaterally we can see its attachment to the upper border of or superior border of petrous part of temporal bone, and posteriorly here is the transverse sinus which is located within this fold of dura mater. So posteriorly it attaches to the lips of transverse sulci on each side. The next here, the probed foramen. You might have studied this in osteology also. This is internal acoustic meatus. So what we are seeing, this is the posterior cranial fossa. Here we can see bits of spinal cord and we can see the vertebral column. And here is the surface. What you see on the posterior surface of petrous part of temporal bone is internal acoustic meatus. So this is internal acoustic meatus. And structures passing through the internal acoustic meatus are 7th, 8th cranial nerves, that is facial and vestibulocochlear nerve, along with labyrinthine vessels which supply the internal ear. Here is one more foramen in the dry skull, which can be asked in a wet specimen also. So this is jugular foramen. This is jugular foramen, which separates the petrous part from the occipital bone. Here we can see this one is the internal acoustic meatus, and this is the jugular foramen, which is irregular shaped foramen. And structures passing through the jugular foramen are 9th, 10th, 11th cranial nerves. So we can see the jugular foramen dividing into three parts: medial, lateral and intermediate. And from the intermediate part, three cranial nerves come out. So this is the only foramen through which the three cranial nerves come out: 9th, 10th, 11th. 9th is glossopharyngeal, 10th is vagus and 11th is spinal accessory nerve. And along with these three nerves, internal jugular vein, which is the continuation of sigmoid sinus, comes out through this foramen, and inferior petrosal sinus, which is the first tributary of internal jugular vein. So it arises just below the cranium, that is the base of the skull, and it enters back into the cranial cavity through this jugular foramen. So these are the structures passing through the jugular foramen. So I repeat: 9th, 10th, 11th cranial nerves, internal jugular vein and inferior petrosal sinus. Next, going on to parotid region. So this is the parotid gland, which is a large pyramidal shaped gland, which is a major salivary gland. You can see the apex is directed downwards. So the common sub-questions asked with the parotid gland are secretomotor pathway and structures present in it. Secretomotor pathway, it begins from the inferior salivary nucleus, which is present in the medulla oblongata. So inferior salivary nucleus, then it forms it enters into the glossopharyngeal nerve. The fibers, preganglionic fibers, pass through the glossopharyngeal nerve, and glossopharyngeal nerve gives rise to tympanic branch, which forms tympanic plexus in the middle ear. And then it forms a lesser petrosal nerve which arises from the tympanic plexus. This lesser petrosal nerve comes out through the cranium through foramen ovale along with the mandibular. As soon as it merges with the mandibular, it joins the mandibular nerve, it relays below the foramen ovale into a ganglion called as otic ganglion. Till here it is the preganglionic fibers. postganglionic fibers from the aortic ganglion to auriculotemporal. Via the auriculotemporal nerve, it supplies the parotid gland. So this is the whole secretomotor pathway of parotid gland and structures present in it. A vein, artery and nerve. So the deepest is the artery. The artery is the external carotid artery present within the gland, and the vein is the retromandibular vein, and nerve is the facial nerve which divides within the substance of the gland. So most superficial structure is the facial nerve present in the gland. So these are the structures present within it. The next spotter here is the parotid duct, we can see, which is arising from the gland and winding round the anterior border of masseter muscle. This is masseter, which is a muscle of mastication. So it winds round the masseter and it pierces a muscle here which is called buccinator. It pierces the buccinator and then it opens into the vestibule of mouth. So the structure here is the parotid duct. The common subquestions are, where does it open? So it opens in the vestibule of mouth and exactly at upper second molar tooth. It opens at the level of crown of upper second molar tooth. So that is the opening of parotid duct. And structures pierced by it, it pierces the buccinator, which we already saw it. Along with the buccinator, we have got buccal pad of fat and buccopharyngeal fascia. So three structures: buccinator, buccal pad of fat and buccopharyngeal fascia. So these are the structures pierced by parotid duct. Next is the submandibular salivary gland. So you can see here, this is the walnut-like submandibular salivary gland here, which is present in the submandibular region. Secretomotor pathway of submandibular gland or parasympathetic supply. It arises from superior salivatory nucleus, which is located in the pons. So superior salivatory nucleus gives off facial nerve. The fibers enters the facial nerve. Actually, it won't enter directly facial nerve. It enters actually through nervus intermedius. Nervus intermedius joins with the facial nerve, and this facial nerve, it enters the middle ear, that is into the facial canal in the middle ear, and then it gives off a branch called as cauda tympani nerve. Cauda tympani nerve, it is a branch of facial which supplies anterior 2/3 for taste sensation. So cauda tympani will go and join with the lingual nerve. Lingual nerve, it is a branch of mandibular, and then along the lingual nerve there is this ganglion called submandibular ganglion, and postganglionic fibers directly relay from the ganglion into the gland because the gland is closely associated with the ganglion. Okay, so that is about the secretomotor pathway. The duct opens in the sublingual summit on either side of the frenulum linguae, below the tongue. So that is the site where the duct opens, and the artery which grooves it, facial artery. Here I am not able to show because facial artery is removed. Usually facial artery winds around the base of the mandible, grooving this gland. So that is one structure which grooves this gland. And the muscle which divides it to two parts, what you are seeing here in this image is the superficial part, which is the larger part, and small deep part is present hiding below mylohyoid. So mylohyoid is the muscle which divides the gland into superficial and deep parts. So these are the subquestions which are commonly asked with submandibular gland. Next, moving on to muscles of mastication. So here is the first muscle of mastication is the temporalis, which we are going to discuss now. So this is the temporal region. The cranium is cut here. We can see the temporal fascia covering temporalis muscle. So all the muscle fibers, anterior, middle and the posterior fibers, they all get converged and gets inserted into a coronoid process of mandible. So if you see the attachments of temporalis, it gets origin from the temporal fossa, and it gets, that is from the superficial temporal line, and then it gets inserted into the coronoid process of the mandible, and a crust of the coronoid which is present along the anterior margins of coronoid process. And its nerve supply and action, it is supplied by the deep temporal nerves which are the branches of mandibular. Action, it helps in the closure of the mouth. Except lateral pterygoid, all the other muscles helps in the closure of the mouth, that is the elevation of mandible. Apart from that, the posterior fibers on both right and left temporalis, they contract to retract the mandible. So retraction of the mandible and also the elevation of the mandible. So these are the actions of temporalis. Attachments we already discussed, and development, it is from the first pharyngeal arch, mandibular arch. All the muscles of mastication develop from the mandibular arch. So temporalis also helps in the side to side grinding movements. Both right and left temporalis acts for grinding movements of the mandible. And we already know that it helps in the retraction of a protruded mandible. Next, about the masseter. Masseter is a large quadrilateral muscle which is present on the lateral surface of the ramus of the mandible. So you can see here masseter. Masseter, it gets origin from the zygomatic arch above. It has got superficial, middle and the deeper parts, and all parts gets inserted to the ramus of the mandible, lateral surface of the ramus of the mandible. Nerve supplied to the masseter, it is supplied by mesenteric nerves which are the branches of mandibular nerve, and action of the masseter helps in the elevation of mandible, that is closing of mouth, and also it helps in protrusion of mandible. So these are the actions of masseter. Number 33. So now we are digging up into the infratemporal fossa. So the ramus of the mandible is removed here to show the muscles in the infratemporal fossa. So there are two muscles which are present in the infratemporal fossa which belongs to muscles of mastication, are medial and lateral pterygoid muscles. First we shall begin with the medial pterygoid. So here this is the medial pterygoid muscle. It is the mirror image of masseter which attaches to the ramus of the mandible, on the medial surface of ramus of the mandible. We all know masseter attaches to the lateral surface. Medial pterygoid attaches to the medial surface of ramus of mandible. So its nerve supply, it is supplied by nerve to medial pterygoid which arises again from the mandibular nerve, and its attachments, it gains its origin by two heads. So one head gets origin from maxilla, that is the tuberosity of the maxilla, and the other head which gets origin from the pterygoid plate, lateral pterygoid plate. We have to say medial surface of lateral pterygoid plate, that is the origin. So both the heads converge and gets inserted to the medial surface of ramus of mandible, the rough area on the medial surface near the angle of mandible. So that is about the attachments, and we all know all the muscles of mastication are developed from the first pharyngeal arch or the mandibular arch. So here is the lateral pterygoid which is horizontally present, little chipped off because it is pierced by lot of lateral pterygoid plexus, venous plexus are here, and we can see the mandibular nerve branches also, that is the lingual and inferior alveolar nerve here which are superficial to medial pterygoid, and here is the lateral pterygoid muscle which is running horizontally. So lateral pterygoid muscle nerve supply, it is supplied by nerve to lateral pterygoid which is again a branch of mandibular, and it gains its attachment, it gets origin by two heads again. So it gets origin from the roof of the infratemporal fossa, that is the greater wing of the sphenoid, and it also gets origin from the lateral surface of lateral pterygoid plate. So lateral pterygoid plate gives origin to both pterygoids, lateral surface to lateral pterygoid, medial surface to medial pterygoid. So that is about its origin. Insertion, it runs horizontally posteriorly towards the TMJ, temporomandibular joint, and it gets inserted below the condyle, that is the head of the condyle, where it is called as pterygoid fovea. The point of insertion is called as pterygoid fovea, And part of the muscle also continues as intra-articular disc, which is a disc present within the temporomandibular joint. So that is about the insertion of lateral pterygoid. And so development, as we all know, it gets origin from the first pharyngeal arch, mandibular arch. So next about the nerves which are seen in the infratemporal fossa. The one which is anteriorly present, this is the anterior side, we already know, we can see the opening of the mouth, and this is the cut part of ramus of the mandible on the posterior side. So this is the lingual nerve. Lingual nerve, you can identify it in the specimen. As we trace the lingual nerve, we can see it goes into the substance of the tongue because it has to supply to anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So this is the lingual nerve. The other nerve which goes into the body of the mandible, not into the tongue, instead it goes into the body, bone. It enters into the mandible. That is the inferior alveolar nerve. So once it enters into the mandible, it forms dental plexus. So talking about this lingual nerve, so the lingual nerve, it is anterior to inferior alveolar, it enters into the substance of the tongue. So its distribution is, it supplies anterior 2/3 of the tongue, general sensations. And it contains chorda tympani nerve along with it to supply for taste sensation as well. So general sensations are supplied to anterior 2/3 of the tongue via the lingual nerve. And then clinical importance of lingual nerve, if it gets damaged, so the anterior 2/3, there won't be general sensation, the general sensation is lost, and special sensation is also affected because the chorda tympani joins the lingual nerve. So these are few clinical aspects. Here is the inferior alveolar nerve. If we trace, it enters into the body of the mandible. So this is the inferior alveolar. You can see the lingual nerve is little deeper, going into the deeper aspect. So inferior alveolar nerve, it is a sensory nerve. The motor part of it is the nerve to mylohyoid, which is given off before entering the mandible. So once it enters, it is purely sensory. So it supplies general sensations, that is exteroceptive sensations to the tooth and its sockets and lower jaw and gums. So during extraction of the tooth, the dentist usually blocks the inferior alveolar nerve if the doctor wants to do extraction of the tooth from the lower jaw. So this is the sensory nerve of lower jaw which forms dental plexus. So clinical importance, we can mention about the inferior alveolar nerve block, which is done during the extraction of the tooth from lower jaw. Here is the maxillary artery. We can see here the horizontally running artery in the infratemporal fossa is the maxillary artery, and here it is actually related to the lateral pterygoid. Lateral pterygoid divides this artery into first and second and third parts. So here is the maxillary artery. So maxillary artery, we know it has got three parts, and structure divides it into three parts is the lateral pterygoid. Here the third question is, mention the branches of first part of maxillary artery, which is usually asked in the spotters, the first part of maxillary artery branches. To remember the branches, we can remember abbreviation as DAMAI, D-A-M-A-I, which means peace in Malaysian language or Malay language. So D stands for, that is deep auricular artery, and DAMAI A. A is for the anterior tympanic artery. Then M, middle meningeal artery. A again DAMAI A. A is the accessory meningeal artery. Then I is the inferior alveolar artery. So these are the branches of first part of maxillary artery. So here we can see a beautifully dissected image of maxillary artery. We can see the maxillary artery and few of its branches also we can see here. And this is the mandibular nerve. So here is the lingual nerve and inferior alveolar nerves which are arising from the mandibular trunk of the mandibular, and we can see the maxillary artery running, and it is a branch of external carotid. So terminal branch, it is a terminal branch of external carotid. So external carotid, after giving rise to maxillary, it continues as superficial temporal artery. So this is the superficial temporal, here is the maxillary artery, which are the terminal branches of external carotid artery. So moving on to the orbit. So we shall begin with the orbit now. So the roof of the orbit is removed to expose the orbit contents of the orbit. The first and foremost nerve which you see as soon as you remove the roof of the orbit is the frontal nerve. So the tight structure here is the frontal nerve. Frontal nerve, it is a branch of ophthalmic division of trigeminal. It is a branch of ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve, and its branches, it is further when it runs anteriorly towards it, splits into two branches called as supratrochlear and supraorbital nerves, which comes out of the orbit and supply the scalp, sensory supply to the scalp. So moving on to the next spotter number 39. Here is the superior rectus muscle. So the frontal nerve is seen here. This is the frontal nerve, which is the cut end, and levator palpebrae superioris is also cut. So this is the superior rectus muscle. Superior rectus muscle, if you see the muscles of orbit, extraocular muscles, there are four recti: superior, inferior rectus, medial and lateral rectus. So all these recti, they get origin from the posterior side, posterior end of the orbit, which is called together as common tendinous ring. So they get origin from a common tendinous ring of Zinn, and the superior rectus runs anteriorly and gets inserted in front of the equator, that is 8 mm in front of the equator. To remember simply, you can remember as SLIM, S-L-I-M, superior rectus, lateral rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus. S for 8 mm, then superior rectus, and lateral rectus you can remember it as 7 mm from the limbus, 7 mm from the limbus back on the eyeball, sclera of the eyeball. Then I is for inferior rectus, that is to 6 mm. Then lastly medial rectus 5 mm. So these are the approximate values from the limbus where these all recti gets inserted to the sclera of the eyeball. So for superior rectus you can say 8 mm behind the limbus, that is sclerocorneal junction to the sclera. Nerve supply, superior rectus is supplied by oculomotor nerve, and the actions of superior rectus, superior rectus helps in elevation, adduction of the eye and medial rotation of the eye. Here is the superior oblique which is present on the medial side. This is the superior oblique. So the next spotter in the orbit is the superior oblique which is present on the medial side. So the medial side, the tendinous muscle, you can see this is superior oblique muscle. It gets origin from the lesser wing of the sphenoid, and that is underneath surface of lesser wing of the sphenoid, and it runs anteriorly and it takes a turn from a fibrocartilaginous pulley, and it runs again posteriorly behind the equator and gets inserted to the posterior part of the eyeball above the inferior oblique. So that is about the attachments of superior oblique muscle. And nerve supply of superior oblique, we have to remember SO4, superior oblique supplied by the trochlear nerve, and helps in depression of the eye. Then it helps in the internal rotation, that is the medial intorsion, that is medial rotation, and also it helps in abduction of the eye. Beautiful dissected image where we can see the lateral rectus. So this is along the lateral margins. Here is the lateral rectus, and apart from lateral rectus we can also appreciate the optic nerve here, and near to it here we can see the ganglion, that is the ciliary ganglion, which is associated with the inferior ramus of the oculomotor nerve, which goes to inferior oblique. And lateral rectus LR6 you have to remember. So the nerve supply of lateral rectus is by abducens nerve, and lateral rectus as other recta it gets origin from the musculotendinous ring of Zinn from the posterior side, and also it gains an extra attachment from the greater wing of the sphenoid as well, and it runs anteriorly and gets inserted to the sclera of the eyeball just in front of the equator of the sclera of the eyeball. So it gets in, to say exactly 7 mm from the limbus, 7 mm from the sclerocorneal junction it gets inserted. So that is about the attachments, nerve supply, and action of lateral rectus. Lateral rectus helps in abduction of the eye. Here is a beautifully dissected image showing all other structures what we studied earlier also. So I'll just revise before going to levator palpebrae superioris. This one is the frontal nerve. We can see the frontal nerve dividing into supraorbital and supratrochlear nerves, which are the terminal branches of frontal nerve. And beneath the frontal nerve, this muscle is the levator palpebrae superioris. Levator palpebrae superioris gets origin from the roof of the posterior part of the roof of the orbit. So posterior part of the roof is formed by the lesser wing of sphenoid. This is the lesser wing. So it gets origin from the lesser wing of the sphenoid, and it runs anteriorly and gets inserted into the eyelid, upper eyelid, called as superior tarsals. It gets inserted. It has got the voluntary and non-involuntary parts. Both gets inserted into the superior tarsal plates. So that is about the levator palpebrae superioris. Nerve supply of levator palpebrae superioris is by oculomotor nerve. And clinical importance, it helps in the elevation of the upper eyelid. It is nowhere acts over the eyeball. It helps in the elevation of the upper eyelid. So in Horner syndrome or damage to the oculomotor nerve, there will be drooping of the upper eyelid because of affecting levator palpebrae superioris muscle. Beneath this muscle we can see this is superior rectus. This is superior rectus. This is levator palpebrae superioris. And here we can see superior oblique also. See here, this is the superior oblique. We can see it is taking a turn here and going deeper. This is the fibrocartilaginous pulley where the superior oblique muscle takes a turn, and we can see the lacrimal gland as well. This is the lacrimal gland present within the orbit. So here is the optic nerve. We can see the optic nerve, its main function is vision because it is the continuation of retina. Blood supply of optic nerve is by ophthalmic artery, and clinical importance, any compression to the optic nerve, the person goes blind. So this completes the second part of head and neck spotters. So that's how we came to an end of second part, and we will do the third part also, and we complete most of the spotters from the head and neck. I hope these videos are helpful for you all for revising before exams. Thank you. Bye. Take care.